Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson. I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Hi, everyone. This week, I thought I would do a thematic episode and talk a little bit about transition, career transition, because it's something that affects pretty much everybody at least some point, probably several times during your working life. You're going to transition from one thing to another. Some of those transitions might be big. Some of them might be quite small. Some of them might be very easy. Some of them might be very hard. And I just thought it's worth a discussion around what I've learned along the way, some of the things that I think about it, not least because since I left the Air Force, I've done a whole load of conversations with people about transition, obviously out of the military, from long careers in the military in some instances to going out into to civilian life and what do I need to do? How do I need to do this? How do I navigate this problem? And what sort of things do I need to think about? I think, therefore, it's certainly worth an episode because it's worth a discussion on all those bits, because I think there might be a few nuggets in there that are going to be useful to you that you might recognize yourself from your own transitions, various, and that hopefully you can either add to, pass on to people, or signpost them to come and have a listen to this and or a conversation with me if they think it's something that will be useful to do. It can be scary, no question about that. I think if you're transitioning from an organization where you've been for a long time, then that jump, no matter how well prepared you think you are for it, it is quite a moment, really. I mean, I remember when I was leaving the Air Force after better part of 35 years, very, very close to 35 years, I thought I was fairly well sorted. I thought I'd had a pretty decent amount of time to get ready and all that sort of thing. But I still remember when I got my last paycheck almost exactly 10 years ago from the time I'm recording this podcast, actually, then that was a big moment. I suddenly thought, wow, I'm actually unemployed. I haven't been unemployed for a very long time. And although I was very clear I was well on the path to getting a job with Deloitte, where I subsequently went to work, it was wasn't done. And I hadn't got that over the line. So I couldn't assume that was definitely there. And so that scary thing does catch you out a little bit. I mean, you definitely need to be ready for the fact that it is going to be different and feel different and take a bit of adjustment. And that's for sure something that I think is worth thinking about to start with. I think the other thing is, depending on how long you've been doing your previous role, think about whether or not you're going to jump straight into something else, or whether you actually can afford financially and everything else really to take some time out. Because I really regret not doing that when I left the Air Force. I should have been a bit braver, taken a bit longer to just recharge the batteries and say, right, winding down for a couple of months before I actually start something new. Instead, I kind of jumped at the first possible opportunity to get into a paid role and have that security blanket over the top of me, I suppose, which was instinctively logical. But at the same time, I do wish now that I had taken a bit more time, because I think it would have been absolutely fine, and it would have been a kind of better outcome for me, and probably for Deloitte, because I would have been more refreshed and instead of being a bit weather beaten when I actually arrived in the door. So that's definitely something personally I think to think about. I think it's also very important to prepare yourself and be conscious of a couple of things. Why are you leaving what you were doing before or are still doing? And what are you thinking about going and doing? And are you well equipped to go and do that? And I think for most people, and for me, obviously, came to the end of my Air Force career. It was kind of a moment when I could have stayed, without a doubt. The Chief of the Air Staff was very happy to keep me, and I could have stayed, and that was clear. And I probably would have got, I think, one more promotion and hung around. But I was very conscious that I'd have actually been probably too old at that point if I'd stayed for another 3, 4, 5 years to really pursue a second career. And I wanted to do that. And I thought the time's right to go. And I also wanted to leave well. I wanted to leave with a smile on my face, a good view in the rearview mirror, and make sure that I had no regrets about any of that. And luckily, I achieved exactly that. I'm very happy that that's what I did. And I think I kind of gave myself some good advice in that space in terms of it's time to go right now. You need to think about what you're going to do next. The interesting bit was when I started thinking about, right, what am I going to do next? I'll be honest, I didn't really have a clue. I thought, okay, I'm probably going to find a job somewhere. I don't think I'm going to be really struggling to do that. But which sector, what was I actually going to aim for? That was a whole different problem set. And I think thinking about that well ahead, if you're looking particularly for a significant change, like you're going from something like the military into the civilian world, that's a really important thing. It's equally important if you're in a civilian career and you are looking at some kind of big change. Then what are you going into? Do you know where you're going to be in that space? How is that going to play to your current skill set? All those kind of things. I vividly remember sitting down with a headhunter very early in my kind of transition discussions and having a conversation with him where he said, right, what do you want to do? And I said, well, basically, these are the things I've done. This is the kind of skill set I've got. And therefore, I'm kind of pretty happy I can turn my hand to kind of anything, really. And I'm not very fixed on which sector or what kind of specific industry within that sector, et cetera, et cetera. And he just looked at me and smiled. He said, it doesn't work like that. You need to be much narrower in perspective, much clearer about what you actually want to do. And you really want to be thinking about how am I going to maximize playing to my own skill set. And in similar vein, when I was starting to talk to Deloitte, I remember vividly a conversation with one of the partners who was very helpful to getting me into Deloitte. We were sitting having a cup of coffee and he said to me, you need to look at your CV, which is impressive. You've done a lot of stuff. You've achieved a lot of things. And you need to now turn around and think about how do I take what I've done previously and monetize it in this organization in an area of business that we actually have a demand. And that was a big moment for me. That really was a big moment for me. I had to think quite hard for quite a long time about how am I actually going to articulate that? How am I going to go from a position where I've got all this long and significant career in the services, rising to pretty senior rank, having done a lot of amazing jobs, having had lots of fantastic opportunities, but so what? We tend to look backwards at what we've actually achieved rather than forwards at what we're going to achieve. And what does this now mean for me going into this new world? How do I actually translate it into that new world, and what's that going to feel like? So that element of preparation is definitely something that is worth doing well before you actually think about jumping from wherever you are right now into a braver new world. Because you definitely want to have a lifeboat to jump into alongside whatever kind of ship you are cruising along in. I mean, in my case, I was on a big aircraft carrier, for the military analogy, I guess, a big ship that's sailing pretty steadily and with a very secure kind of backbone to what I was doing. And jumping off the side of that, I needed to make sure I wasn't jumping into the freezing cold water. There was something going to be there for me. And that I think is really, really important. I think it's also really important that you don't jump into the first boat that necessarily comes along, because you may, particularly on the back of anything long in terms of career, you may suddenly find people are offering you things quite quickly, some of which may be superficially appealing, but may actually not offer you long-term what you're actually looking for. You may also find quite quickly that you're being offered and asked to do things that are pro bono when actually that's fine, but you can potentially overdo that and suddenly find your time poor just at a time when you actually don't want to be time poor, particularly if you're looking for the need for paid work. I'm making that as an assumption right from the start. So I think you need to be very clear about what level of kind of pro bono commitments you're prepared to accept, and whether you want to work full-time, part-time, whether you want to work exclusively from home, whether you want to work for yourself versus working for a company, etc. But in my case, looking specifically at military transition now, I'm leaving the service after all that time. I was being persuaded by a few people that, oh no, you definitely ought to look at portfolio careers and go out and do that kind of thing. And I went, well, that's fine, but actually I really want to do something where I've got a bit more job security, where I kind of earn my spurs a little bit and where I learn a bit more about what's going on out in the commercial world. And so for me, that transition into full-time paid employment at Deloitte, albeit that I actually only did it for 3.5 years, was a really important jump because it taught me a huge amount. I learned a fantastic amount of different things that really set me up for doing what I now do, which is much more in the portfolio career space and running my own thing and being independent from anybody. And that, had I done that straight out of the Air Force, I think that would have been a risk too far for me. Now, I'm not trying to presuppose that that would be the case for everybody. It may well be that suits you perfectly and you can make a huge success of that, and that's perfect. But just be mindful of it. Think about how comfortable am I going to be with that in terms of financial security and just job security and all the benefits that you get from working for for a bigger company versus actually working on your own. I was also very conscious in the transition discussion that I probably was going to get a decent job somewhere, but I was also conscious that if I transitioned on from that job, then the conversation was all going to be about what I had achieved in that job, not what I'd previously achieved in the Air Force over the preceding time. So making a success of that transition step was something that I felt was very important. And I stand by that. I think that was true. I think, had I gone somewhere and basically decided after 6 months or a year or something, this really isn't for me, then I think that when it might have been a slightly more difficult conversation about where I'm going to go next and what I'm going to do. So I think, again, be careful, be choosy about that and make sure you're well informed as you possibly can be and feeling that by the time you actually start somewhere, you're going to be in a good place. So how do you get that start point? How do you think about where you're going to go and what you're going to do? Well, if you don't like coffee, then you need to find another drink that you like and start having lots of cups of it or glasses of it with people that you can get information from. Because for me, at least, I think the networking side of this was utterly crucial. I've lost count completely of the number of people that I met. But at the time, 10 years ago when I was doing this, I did sort of systemize it a little bit. I had a very clear plan of who I wanted to meet up with, what kind of conversation I wanted to have. Most of those were information gathering. I was trying very hard to avoid the gizzard job kind of approach to anybody, and I would strongly caution you against that. I think it's about making the right impression and asking the right questions and then seeing whether something falls into your lap rather than necessarily being too overt, unless, of course, you're actually applying for something that's an advertised role. But if you're looking at a networked kind of job, then try not to be too overt about it if you can avoid it. On the cups of coffee thing, I had loads of them with loads of different people. Some were people I knew well, some were introductions from other people. All of them over time gave me jigsaw pieces. They gave me varying numbers of jigsaw pieces and certainly varying types of jigsaw piece. Some gave me edges and corners and pieces that were very distinctive and very obvious and very, very useful. Some gave me blue sky and blue sea, which was a lot less immediately useful, but still relevant as the picture started to form gradually over time to give me a view of what was potentially going to work for me, where was I best suited, which kind of people did I fancy working for, what kind of role did I think was going to suit me the best, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are really, really important. Advice for how you go about that: treat everything as an interview. Everything as an interview. That's my personal mantra, and I think it's really relevant because if you do that, you can't really get it wrong. If you're too casual, you may find that actually you make the wrong kind of impression with somebody, and actually that was the gateway to the next conversation that you needed to have that might have been going to open you an opportunity that you hadn't even seen coming. So treat everything as if it was really, really important. Prepare before you actually meet people. Think hard about how can I do this better? What do I need to know? If you turn up and have a conversation with someone who's working at company X and you know nothing about that company, then unless you really are just in a broader information gathering space and you're not interested in working there at all, you can leave a terrible impression. And it's very much a case of you never get a second chance to make a first impression, particularly with people you don't know. I mean, people you know well who you're just meeting because you want to have a discussion, that's fair enough to some extent. But even then, be careful because you need to make the right impression on them before they're then going to turn around and onward recommend you and introduce you to other people. I've had countless conversations with people since I left the Air Force who are leaving the military or who are moving on from civilian roles into different things, and advising them on what they might think about, what kind of options potentially are there, what my own journeys look like, what kind of pitfalls I've had along the way, what sort of successes, what strategies have worked. All those kind of things are the things I've shared. And I've had one or two people in that time who I think have been woefully inadequately prepared and really kind of blown an opportunity before they start by being completely casual, turning up. I'm not going to get hung up on dress here, but turning up in what was a formal environment in a world where we were still really quite formally dressed in jeans and a t-shirt to have a chat with somebody. Perhaps think about that. Do you want people to make that kind of impression of you? You can wear what you like in today's world, and you can do what you like by and large in today's world within reason and with as long as it's ethically appropriate and all the rest of it. But you have to be ready for the fact that people will make judgments about you. And if you're looking for a role somewhere, you want those judgments to be the right ones. You want to shape that thinking as best you can and make sure you're giving yourself every chance to be successful. Now, obviously, if you're going to go and visit a company that is super casual, don't turn up in a suit and tie. That's probably not going to be that helpful either. But take advice, talk to people about what's going to land best. Who am I going to meet? What kind of person are they as best you can tell? What kind of personality type do they have? What's going to be the best approach to them? Are they the kind of people that are really direct and to the point, so you need to just get on with it? Are they people that want to have lots of detailed thinking from you? Are they people that want to be really friendly and chatty? Are they people that are just kind of wild thinkers and you're going to be fairly random in their whole approach? Those kind of psychometric quadrants, if you like, are relevant to you in thinking about who am I going to be dealing with to the best of your ability to actually to get that. So don't be too casual about it. Try and find as much information as you can before you start, and be super careful about making assumptions. I, without a word of a lie, had a conversation one time with a pretty senior guy, actually, who was leaving the military. And I was still in Deloitte full time at that stage. He was clearly in the gizzard job mode. He was after me helping him to get a job at Deloitte. And we were having a good chat about everything I'd learned along the way and the things that had gone well for me, the things that had gone perhaps less well and all the rest of it. And at some point in the conversation, he essentially said, well, yeah, but an organization like yours can't afford not to have people like me. And I just looked at him with a kind of slightly bemused mixture of horror, I suppose, on my face. And I looked at him, I said, not only can they, but they absolutely will not want to have you if you have an attitude like that. You need to dispense with the I'm the great I am, and this is what I've done before. And you need to take a very, very clear-eyed view that actually in most instances, they have a lot of choice and they have a lot of different options for the type of people they're going to have. And they certainly don't want arrogant individuals who think they are entitled in some way to a role. So be super, super careful about all of that. And I think the more people you meet, the more jigsaw you collect, the more idea you'll have, that's going to really help you. If you actually have a chance, as I was lucky enough to do some work shadowing in places before you start on a kind of internship basis, it's almost certainly not going to be paid, but it's going to give you a great insight into that organization. I did that with Deloitte before I started. I did 2 weeks there, and it was essentially, I have to say, a 2-week interview process. I really felt that. I felt that every day was a kind of a bit of a, let's have a look at Judson and see what he's like, and do we actually want to employ him? But at the same time, it was the other way around too. It gave me a massively good opportunity to have a real look under the bonnet of Deloitte and be really clear as to whether I wanted to join or not, and what kind of organization was it. And so when I ultimately then did join, I had a much better idea, which really set me up very well. So I would absolutely recommend that to you if you get the chance to do it. You may not, and you may have to just turn around and make a jump and see how it goes. Obviously, use your network. Goes without saying, really. If you've got people in that organization or close to it, allied to it, have previously worked there, etc., then tap them for anything you can get for insight about what it's like to work there, how you're going to navigate the process to get in if you're trying to actually get into that organization, but also make sure you're clearly understanding what the sort of circumstances are going to be once you're in the door. You don't want to feel you've joined and then suddenly go, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. So make sure you are very clear about what your needs are, what your expectations are, what your own kind of assumptions are. And at some point along that journey, make sure you're satisfying all of those things, that you are ticking the right boxes. Again, I've met somebody transitioning out of the military where I can remember with another colleague of mine, we sat down and had a conversation, and this individual was saying, right, okay, I'm very clear. I live up in the northwest, but working in London is absolutely fine. And we went, well, hang on, are you sure about that? You're paying for this, you're paying for the commute, and you're going to be paying for the accommodation because you're going to have to stay in London. There's no way you could commute this daily. And this was, again, pre-COVID, when obviously the world was a little different. But you need to think about those costs. You're going to have things potentially that you're doing that are different to what you had before. So make sure, again, you're clear-eyed about that. You understand what the package looks like, and when you get into that kind of conversation, and whether that actually meets your expectations and your needs. What's the difference between your needs and your expectations? What's the minimum you're prepared to accept? And is that too minimalist, or is that going to be just fine? My own view is, in terms of levels and grades when you're joining a new organization, is that often people move to promote. They'll actually move one organization to go to a similar organization on promotion if they've got the requisite expertise to do that. That is a really good way of doing it. If you're comfortable with doing that, just remember that when you leave one organization, you leave behind a lot more than just the people you know there. Your whole network, your whole set of experience, obviously all the material and so on that you've actually worked on, almost certainly you're going to be embargoed from taking any of that with you. And so apart from what's in your head, you're going to be finding yourself with a pretty new start. And that may just be fine, but you just need to think about that a little bit and be sure that it's okay. So let's just take it on a stage. You've got the job. Now what? You've gone through this whole process. You've actually jumped into a world where your transition has progressed, and you've now secured yourself a contract with a new employer. And how are you going to handle that? In my view, one of the things that's really, really important is humility. Humility for me is absolutely key. It doesn't matter how senior you are, where you've come from, you need to be humble in the new job. You need to be absolutely seeking out advice from every level you can get it. Be ready to roll your sleeves up. Be really clear that there is a steep learning curve here, which, depending on your own direct expertise, may be near vertical, or it may actually be a gentler slope, but it's still going to be a learning curve for sure. You're joining a new organization, and it is going to be different. I found one of the things that really unexpectedly surprised me when I left the military and joined Deloitte was I'd cruised along in the military doing 2.5, 3-year tours, living sometimes a bit longer than that in individual places. But the substructure underneath all of that, although I was moving jobs and the jobs were radically different, the substructure, the pay, the appraisal system, the kind of general HR process, if you like, was all the same, regardless of where you were. So suddenly you move to a different organization and that's all completely different. And you need to just pay attention to that and be aware that there's a whole load of stuff you're going to have to think about that you didn't necessarily know. And that's true even moving from commercial company to commercial company, because they are going to be different. They'll have a different style. They'll have a different approach. And you don't want to make assumptions about that. You want to be clear before you join, and immediately you have joined. What am I going to have to do to get myself up to speed here? How do I become effective in the fastest possible time? I would suggest it's absolutely not the time to prioritize working from home, even in a world now today where that's more and more common. I think the reality is you need to be getting back into building relationships, drinking more cups of coffee or your beverage of choice as you go around meeting people in your new organization, because the networking element of any big organization is crucial inside it as well as outside it. If you are facing out towards clients, as I was obviously in a professional services setting in Deloitte, then the external relationships are clearly very important, but the internal relationships are even more important in many ways, because you need to know who's who so that you can turn around and make sure you're A, doing things the right way, B, saddling up with the right people to understand how things move forward, and C, so that you're actually in a position that they know who you are and hopefully then refer stuff to you to give you opportunities and so on to build on. Now, depending on your industry, it may be different than that. But either way, the relationships piece is going to be important. If you're transitioning from one organization to another, you definitely need to think about making that work really, really well. And the only real way you're going to do it is to turn around and start meeting people and just understand. And again, be humble. Be open to, I'm new, I'm looking to understand and explore the organization a little bit. I'm just after your experiences, how I can best make the best use of my own experience, what I've done, et cetera, et cetera. So the more you do that, the more successful you're going to be, I think. Try and understand early how you're going to navigate the new organization you're in. That may be easy. It may be a lot more difficult. It depends on the type of organization it actually is, how opaque it is, how transparent it is. But you want to very quickly start becoming clear on your medium to long-term plan. What sort of support do you need to get yourself along the way on that journey? Because that is, again, very, very important. It's setting you up for success, either in a transitional sense that you're in that job with a view that you're going to be comfortable very quickly doing whatever you're doing, and then you're going to lily pad on to somewhere else, or that actually if you're going to stay there and you want to be promoted and want to go up the career ladder in that new organization, you understand what that looks like, what the requirements are, and how you best position yourself for it. Don't get caught out by being in a position where you effectively drift along and it isn't going to work out quite the way you hoped it was because you haven't necessarily put the right kind of effort in. And the reason I say that, and the bit that I was going to more or less close this episode with, is my own transition journey was in many ways very successful. I mean, I went from the Air Force in a big job out to go and work for a blue chip organization as a director, having negotiated my way in there with a very good contract that was financially very, very good for me, etc. But it wasn't quite as pure and clean as it sounds when you say it that way, because I learned a huge amount when I was in Deloitte. I did do all the things that I've said to you on this episode that I think are important. I was very much, playing the humility card and meeting lots of people and working to navigate the organization. But in doing that, one of the things I did was I allowed myself to be used by the organization in a bunch of ways with a bunch of different clients to grow my own experience, which was good for me, no question about that. And I bear no malice about this at all. But what ended up happening, of course, was I was quite spread in terms of my own experience. I'd almost done too much breadth and not enough depth. And in order to have been promoted from director to partner in Deloitte, I would have needed to have handled this slightly differently and basically built myself a better business case, invested the time in building the relationships to ensure I knew the right partners who potentially would support that business case, and boosted my chances along the way. And I didn't do that, and the firm didn't. I'm not blaming the firm for this, because why should they? It's not their job to do that. But they didn't really think about doing that to me and assisting me along that way. I had some very good mentoring support, some very good help in terms of all sorts of bits that went along with it. But this wasn't really one of them. And I suddenly found myself 2.5 years in, really, where I was in a position where I was thinking, this is not going to work quite the way I thought it was going to. And if I'd wanted to stay and if I'd wanted to become a partner, which potentially I could have done, I would have had to have stayed quite a lot longer and specialized in building a particular business case, etc. So I chose not to do that. I chose to do my own second transition out and go and do what I do now, which is run my own business and set myself up that way. And that generated its own set of complications. That's probably worth another episode all on its own in terms of running a business and what to do and what not to do. And I'm no expert. There are plenty of people who've done it much better than me, but I'll certainly share my own pitfalls and stories in due course about it. But I think the journey from the Air Force as a big institution into another big organization that was Deloitte is what I've been describing on this. I think thinking about things well up front, deciding how you want to manage that transition, it may well be more straightforward. You may have spent years in a commercial organization, you're jumping into another commercial organization, and therefore you have an easier transition than I was alluding to. It may equally be more difficult. You may suddenly find that things are significantly tougher for you. And the time that you have invested up front and the relationships you have built and the amount of insulation you have from really tough things happening is really important. I think the other thing that I haven't said along the way here that is really important too is don't hitch to one particular horse along the way too early. There is absolutely no reason not to be pursuing a whole range of different opportunities once you decide what you want to be doing. And once you've got some opportunities to pursue, some of those will be faster runners, some of them will be slower runners, some of them will be probably more attractive to you than others. But at the same time, actually riding as many horses as you can for as long as you can is entirely fine. The only time you need to jump onto one particular horse and ride across the finish line is at the finish line. You can't sign multiple contracts with people to do multiple different things, obviously. So you need to decide what you're going to do early enough that you're not embarrassing yourself or another organization and burning some boats that you don't want to burn. But at the same time, you never know that it's actually going to be contract signing day until it's contract signing day. So having options, having the ability to be flexible, having the ability to turn around and change your mind and have your mind changed for you by something happening that you weren't expecting is really important. So you are planning for success and absolutely hoping for the best, but also planning for the worst. So you've got both options in play, and you're able to adapt, overcome, and be ready to deal with fallout of something not going your way at all. I really hope that's helpful. I've shared a fair few things in there that I think might be useful nuggets for people. I often talk about this stuff with lots of people, as I say, and I think it's one of those things that lots of different people will have different advice. My jigsaw point, they'll all have different pieces of jigsaw. They'll all have different pieces of advice. I hope I've given you some jigsaw pieces. I hope I've given you some edges and corners. And by all means, get in touch if I could ever be of help to talk about this a little bit further, because I would be absolutely delighted to work with you if needs be to help with your own transition, whatever kind of shape that looks like and wherever you're looking to go to. Thanks, though, for listening, as always, and I'll be back again very soon. Speak soon. Bye now. I really hope that this episode has been a useful one for you. I think it's something I feel pretty passionate about in terms of trying to get transitions right. I think it is definitely an area with lots of pitfalls. This is certainly one of those ones where I hope I'm adding some value, though, to you directly and providing you with advice that is going to actually help you. And if I have, and if you're up for a bit more of that, then listen to some of the other thematic episodes and some of the personal stories and indeed some of the guests, because you'll get lots from each of those as well. And if you're getting plenty of value, then think about giving me some value back, please. Think about going to support the show, the link in the podcast platform that you're looking at this on, or going to patreon.com, www.patreon.com/leading4life. And there you'll find the opportunity to sign up and support the show financially. If you're up for doing that, I would be immensely grateful. It doesn't cost very much, but it makes a very, very big difference to what I do. And that will be much appreciated. But either way, I'm just glad to have you as a listener, and I really appreciate the fact that you've got this far in the podcast and you're still listening to me, so that's got to be a good thing. And I'll speak very soon, and all the best until then. Bye for now.